Hi, this is Matt, and you're listening to Bluegrass Jam Along, the podcast for anyone and everyone who plays bluegrass. Hey there, today is June 9th, 2022, and yesterday, June the 8th, would have been Tony Rice's birthday. Now, I wanted to do something to mark that, and I'll tell you why I didn't do it on his birthday, because yesterday I had the huge honour of interviewing Happy Traum from Homespun tapes, and I knew he was going to talk about Tony, because how could he not? He's recorded him on many occasions and was a sort of lifelong friend. So I thought I'd wait and see if I got something from Happy to add to this, and I did. So you're going to hear from Happy. But what I've done is I've put a few bits and pieces together from some of the different interviews I've done over the past year. So many people mentioned Tony when I talked to them, and I thought it'd be cool to just put a few bits together and have a little celebration of some of the cool stuff about him. So you're going to hear from Chris Eldridge, who was a friend of Tony's, but also Tony mentored him when he was a young player and sort of through his career by the sound of it. And so you're going to hear quite a bit from Chris. You're going to hear from Mike Marshall, who played with Tony in David Grisman's band. You're going to hear from Happy Traum, who recorded Tony for Homespun on a few occasions and spoke to him a lot. You're going to hear a bit from Happy. And you're also going to hear from Marcel Ardans from Lessons with Marcel YouTube channel, who spent a huge amount of time transcribing Tony's breaks, sort of understanding his style and sharing that with everybody. So I thought he'd be a cool one to throw in there too. So I hope you enjoy this. It's meant very much as a tribute to Tony, with love and affection, and as a thank you to him for all the brilliant music and inspiration he's given us all over the years. So happy birthday to you, Tony, yesterday. You are fondly remembered. And here's some of the cool stuff people said. We're going to kick off with Chris Eldridge.
You know, one of the big things that Tony really taught us by example, and me personally as my mentor, which he really was at kind of a crucial point in my development, was that you have to be yourself. You got to do things the way only you can do them. That's kind of where it's at. And that I think in a way he was kind of flattered when he realized that, people would study his thing and imitate him. I think part of him appreciated that because it's obviously a really nice thing. It's a validation of what you've done. But at the same time, I know for a fact that it drove him crazy. And he didn't, on this other side of him, just didn't want to hear that. Didn't want to hear people doing that. He wanted to hear people being themselves and being unique. And that was something that he and I talked about a lot. Because at that point in time, when I was younger, I could really play Tony like Tony. I can't anymore. I can't even come close anymore. But at a certain point, I was pretty good at it. And he kind of was like, I beat you to it. Like, I've already done that. Like, you need to kind of find yourself. You need to sound like you. And he told me that his ability to sound like himself, when he was young, he wanted to play like Clarence White. And he said at a certain point, I just realized I couldn't. I just could never be Clarence. And there were things, I had weaknesses that wouldn't allow me to be like Clarence. And of course, in those weaknesses, he found his strengths. And then, look what he became and what he did. He kind of became the I would argue the all-time most important figure in bluegrass guitar. I kind of redefined not only bluegrass guitar, created this whole vocabulary you could use, elevated everybody he played with, but he also changed the music and kind of ushered it into its modern form. I'd kind of argue more than anybody.
So next up, we're going to hear a little bit from Marcel Ardans from Lessons with Marcel. And this is a chunk of the interview that I did with him last year. And just as a bit of context, we've been talking about Tony playing Ovation guitars and sort of, how people didn't believe it and some of the sort of incredulity around it. And Marcel had a few interesting thoughts about that. And then we sort of chat a bit about our favourite breaks, and Marcel goes on to talk about Tony's rhythm playing, which has become a bit of a recurring feature when I talk to people about Tony on the podcast. So yeah, here's Marcel.
Like, for instance, Manzanita. I think Manzanita is played on an Ovation guitar. But depending on the mix that you're trying to get, the Ovations tend to be a little less boomier than a Martin. So it's almost like this thing has already been low cut. So if you go into the recording studio, you want your lead to cut more, you want some of the bass taken out of your instrument. The Ovation already does that. Or say you have a really active bass player and you want to play your rhythm part and you don't want the low frequencies of the guitar to mix with the bass, maybe grab the Ovation. Maybe that would be good for the rhythm part.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how they used it. It like did a different job.
I mean, I guess, particularly if you're playing with more than one guitar and everybody's got a D28, they're all going to occupy the same sort of space. So if you've got something that's got a different voice, it's going to shine out a bit.
That's right. Yeah, it's a weird thing to think about because Ovations are an eternal joke now. But yeah, they really like those things.
Yeah. So talking to Tony Rice, I guess brings me on to, you've transcribed a whole load of Tony's licks and breaks, and a whole load of other. I mean, you probably lost count of how many solos you've transcribed now. Do you have a favourite bluegrass guitar break of all time?
Man, that's a hard question.
I can give you a minute to think about it, and I'll tell you my answer if you like.
One of my.
No, go.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say I was going to give you a bit of thinking time, but both my favourite guitar break and my favourite mandolin break are on the same tune, and it's Tony Rice's I've Waited As Long As I Can. I just think the solo on that is just brilliant. It's got a bit of all the things that make Tony Tony.
Is I've Waited As Long As I Can, is that on Plays and Sings Bluegrass?
Is it? That's a good question, because I first heard it on a compilation, so I get confused because I always hear something else after it in my head, and I get lost as to which album it's on. But yeah, it's just got the best solo.
The only reason I bring it up, and I might be wrong, people can look it up, but the album Plays and Sings Bluegrass, Tony plays a lot of weird stuff, despite it being like him playing traditional bluegrass on that record. That record has a lot of like bizarre Tony licks on it, so it's kind of a lot of people's favorite. I know it's Trey Hensley's favorite bluegrass record. It's one of mine too. I was going to say that one of my favorite Tony breaks is on the tune Shadows. There's this really, really beautiful thing that he does right at the beginning of the break. And maybe one of the reasons I like it so much is it kind of confounds me to like put it on paper. The very first three notes are almost like a quarter note triplet starting off the beat. It's this very like, it kind of just washes over you. It's like this waterfall effect as the break starts, and it's just gorgeous. It's beautiful. And if anything, it just shows like how interesting his time is. Like the feel on the beginning of that break is just remarkable. And he plays all kinds of just gorgeous, beautiful things on that. It's lovely. It's not a hot break by any means. It's just a beautiful break.
Oh, I'm going to have to go back and listen to that. I'm going to stick a link to that track in the show notes so people can go and listen to it too. Yeah. I think it's the thing with, listen to Tony Rice and the time, because everything feels so right, like everything was a choice that no other choice could have possibly been made. It all sounds so in its place that you like sometimes you don't even think about the time because it's just so lyrical and fluid. Or even when he's playing quickly and he's playing hard, it's just like the time is incredible.
It's kind of like when artists play with proportions of items. And they can give you a really interesting perspective on something by playing with proportion. But if you sit and think about it, that's not what the item or the person actually looks like. They talk about like the statue of David, how like the hands are much larger than they should be. But when you're looking up at it, it all makes sense, right? It feels very proportional. And that's kind of what Tony's rhythm does. It kind of ebbs and flows. Sometimes he's rushing and sometimes he's laying back. And it's more than just playing in time. He's playing around the beat in such a nice way that it can just be gorgeous.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I sort of picked up most listening to a lot of the tributes to Tony and the various sort of conversations on Facebook and the various things. But like the amount of people who mentioned his rhythm playing more than his lead playing. And the transitions between his lead and rhythm as well, and just sort of that sense that the same way people talk about Placido Domingo on an opera stage is that he just ups everybody else's game by 50% just by being there and doing what he does. Yeah. Just brings more out of everybody else as well, and that's a beautiful thing to hear about a musician.
There's a great little like Q&A that's on YouTube. So someone with like a handheld video camera in the 90s, and maybe Tony had just given a workshop or something, but they're asking him candidly a couple questions. And I believe they ask him to demonstrate some rhythm, and he says, "Oh, I can't do that without a band here." And I thought that was such an interesting statement for him to make. And I feel the same way now that I think about it. Like, I can teach you some basics of rhythm. I can show you lots of different things that people do, but rhythm is a reactionary element. It has to have other people for it to like sort of do what it's supposed to do. It's hard to do in a vacuum. So it's funny that,
really true.
The thing that Tony's most known for this thing, and someone's like, hey, can you demo some of your excellent rhythm? And he's like, I can't do it unless there's so many people playing that it's hard to hear.
I mean, to me, Tony as a rhythm guitar player, that's what just still blows my mind. I mean, Tony as a soloist is incredible, and what power he played with and the clarity is unbelievable. But I could let that go if I had to choose that or just the rhythm guitar. I'd somehow have the rhythm guitar, because the way that he was able to participate in the ensemble and lift up his fellow musicians was unreal and unbelievable. And that's something that I kind of learned about from Tony, and that's something I've really tried to study as a rhythm guitar player. I'm not half as good at it as Tony is, but that's something that's always been really important to me. I've tried to be a guitar player who can hopefully get in there and I don't want to call it magic, but that's kind of what how Bela describes Tony's playing. He said he could just bring a little extra magic into the situation. So that to me is like the highest calling of bluegrass guitar, is that you don't just strum the chords. When it gets to like a higher level art, you kind of make the music more rich, and you help do things that are going to help everybody to play better.
Oh, that's really interesting, because it's as somebody who has obviously never seen Tony Rice play or meet him, just when all the tributes and all the podcasts and videos and interviews were sort of coming out at the beginning of the year, the thing that I was most struck by was the way everybody talked about his rhythm playing, and the sort of the space and platform he created for other people, and how. And I found that fascinating, because most bluegrass players spend most of their time practicing melody and taking breaks, and not much time practicing rhythm. And that's mostly what you're going to do as a guitar player, is play rhythm.
Yeah.
And just to hear people talk about that, I found that really sort of enlightening. I went back and listened to it all with sort of fresh ears. And I interviewed Marcel from Lessons with Marcel, the YouTube channel.
Oh, yeah.
And he was saying he'd sort of seen this clip, and somebody had asked Tony to demonstrate his rhythm style, and he said, well, I can't do it because there's nobody else here. I can't do it on my own. And that's such a remarkable... This guy, I can't show you how to play rhythm guitar because there's nobody else to play with.
Yeah, it was completely interactive, completely reactive, and yeah, he did. He made everybody play better, because it wasn't just his time feel. Although his time feel was unreal. It's like, for me, man, I can get all the chords and the note, like that stuff I can do, and all the stuff Tony could do, but I can't get the feel. I've tried my whole life. I can't make it feel like that. I just can't do it. And I wish I could. I would, but it's like, so with Tony, it's just that feeling that he had for it was, man, it was like, I don't know. It made everybody soar. Another thing that I heard Bela say about Tony, that I loved, was he said is like stepping onto a magic carpet. It's just like you step onto this thing and you just like start flying. You didn't know that you could just be on this thing, and then you start flying. But the thing that kind of caught my ear that I could do was, and that Tony does so beautifully, is like play all these different colors, like bring all these interesting colors to bear, as well as that kind of rhythmic touch. And that's so cool. I mean, one of my favorite records, maybe my favorite record for that is the Bluegrass Sessions, Tales from the Acoustic Planet Part 2, the record that they made. And I, listening to the rhythm guitar on that record, and it's to me, it's not necessarily about Tony's feel on that record. And part of this might be how Bela edited it, because Bela edits stuff a lot. And he'll go and try and get all the best parts. And it feels great on there, but that to me is not, that record's fascinating from a kind of rhythm guitar content perspective. Because you can tell that Bela was like getting in there and just like the coolest little thing. Like, where did that come from? It's all over on that record, and it's really fun to kind of put that record on and just listen through and pay attention to the rhythm. It's beautiful, totally beautiful.
Cool. A couple of those bits with Chris were cut together from different sections of the interview that I did with him. So if you want to hear them sort of in their full context, go back and listen to the whole thing. But yeah, I just sort of thought they might make sense put together like that. Next up, we've got Mike Marshall, who played with Tony and David Grisman's band. And this is the coolest description of a musician I think I've ever heard. But yeah, see what you think.
I mean, when I think about playing with Tony Rice, shit, man. You know, it was just like it's like a firestorm, an intimate firestorm washing over you, like a bath, but also burning all your skin off and replanting it with new skin that was much better.
Wow.
I don't know. You just can't get that. And he got it from JD, who got it from Bill, who got it from Jimmy Martin, who got it from Bill Monroe.
So, final word tonight is going to go to Happy Traum, who recorded Tony for Homespun several occasions and maintained a friendship with him right up to the end. And yeah, Happy just tells us a cool story about Tony and one of the recording sessions in particular. And I thought we'd finish with that. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this. Over to Happy.
And I think Tony, for one, really appreciated what we did because, when I first approached him, it was around 70, maybe 1978 or so, 77, 78. As I said before, he had never really taught anything. And somehow the sessions we did together set us up for a friendship that went right until the time he passed. He was always appreciative, and he did several videos for us. I mean, quite a few. In fact, the very first one he did was one of the first videos we ever did. And it was not a grade A experience for him or for us. Not what came out. What came out was great. But we were here, and he came to Woodstock to visit us. This was probably 1983, maybe 84, something like that. And we booked Todd Rundgren's studio here in Woodstock. But he had never really done any video there. And it turned out it was the winter and there was no heat. So it was freezing in the studio. And there were all kinds of technical glitches. And by the time we got the tape running, poor Tony had been sitting there for hours. And somehow for a guy who was, everybody knows, a very high-strung individual, not only his guitars are high-strung, but but he could not have been more patient and nicer. And what came out of that was some songs that, like his Church Street Blues, which has been bootlegged innumerable times on YouTube and has gotten millions of views. Unfortunately, those millions of people don't think ahead and then buy his video, but at least they are watching it, so that's good.
And that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this. It was fun listening back to the interviews to put it together. Just so much cool stuff in there. If you want to hear any of those interviews, I'll put links in the show notes so you can go and check them out. And the full interview with Happy is going to come out next Monday, so look out for that as well. Yeah, great. I will see you next time. Have a great week. Happy picking.